Would you like to make a podcast? Spotify has a way to let you make one easily, distribute it everywhere, and even earn money, all in one place, for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit right from your phone or computer, so you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are heard. And video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free. You know, ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I've enjoyed sharing my favorite stories with children around the world. If you've ever thought of starting your own podcast, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Welcome to Bedtime Stories. Please make sure you press follow to get notified of new stories and leave a rating. If you enjoy today's story, forward it to a friend. And now, Willie Mouse goes on a journey to find the moon. Willie Mouse often heard his mother and father say that the moon was made of green cheese, and one evening he thought he would see if he could find it. He packed up a piece of cheese and a crust of bread, and taking his lantern, set out on his travels. He had not gone far when he met his friend Mr. Woodmouse, who asked him where he was going. "Oh," said Willie, "I'm going to find the moon. It's made of green cheese, you know." "I don't believe it's made of green cheese at all," said Mr. Woodmouse, but Willie wouldn't listen to him, and went on his way. Coming round Clover Green, whom should he meet but Miss Jenny Wren, looking very happy in her yellow bonnet. "Where are you off to?" she said. "I'm on my way to find the moon." "The moon?" cried Miss Wren. "You'll never reach it. I flew ever so high one evening, and I didn't seem to get any closer." "Well," said Willie, "why should it be made of green cheese if you can't reach it?" And on he went. Soon he came upon a wood, and looking up, he saw Mr. Squirrel jumping from branch to branch. "Good afternoon," he said. "You do seem high up. Surely you can tell me the way to the moon. It's made of green cheese, you know." "I don't think it's made of green cheese. Why shouldn't it be made of nuts?" "How ignorant everybody is," said Willie Mouse to himself. So on he went once more, until he came to a little hole in the ground, and being very curious, he peeped inside. There sat Mrs. Mole, who came out when she saw him. "Do you live down here?" asked Willie, politely. "Yes," replied Mrs. Mole. "Then I'm afraid you can't tell me how to get to the moon. It's made of green cheese, you know. Mother says so." "Nonsense, my child. Don't waste your time looking for the moon. Keep your eyes open for worms." Willie said "Goodbye" to Mrs. Mole. Then he sat down and opened his parcel because it was getting late, and he thought he'd better have some dinner. "I may not reach the moon for a while," he thought, "so I'd better save a little piece of cheese for supper." After dinner he fell asleep, and on waking, he found that it was quite dark. He looked up, and there was the moon, high up in the sky. "Oh, Mr. Moon," he cried, "why do you seem a long way away? I think it would be much easier for you to come down here than for me to get up there." But Mr. Moon stayed where he was. Looking up, Willie Mouse saw two big eyes gleaming in the dark. They belonged to Mrs. Owl, and as Willie was only a little mouse, he didn't know that Mrs. Owl had a special liking for little mice. "Please, Mrs. Owl," he said, "how can I get to the moon?" Down flew Mrs. Owl. "This is the way to the moon," she said, and she caught him up in her beak and carried him back up to the owl house, where she lived. When Willie Mouse saw all the owlets, with their beaks gaping open, he began to be frightened, for he feared that Mrs. Owl was going to eat 'em all up. But what Willie didn't know was that a good green elf, who lived in the trunk of the tree, was near at hand, and just as Mrs. Owl opened her beak, the leaves rustled, and there stood the good green elf, who jumped to the ground with Willie on his back. When the good green elf had shown Willie the way home, Willie thought he would ask the elf if the moon were really made of green cheese. But all of a sudden the elf disappeared. Willie Mouse still thinks one day he'll find the moon and have enough cheese to last a lifetime. But he will wait until he's a little older and bigger before he tries to jump to the moon. And perhaps by that time, he may be a little wiser too. Thank you for listening to Bedtime Stories. Please make sure you press follow to get notified of new stories and leave a rating. If you enjoyed today's story, forward it to a friend. If you have a suggestion for a new story, send us an email, magicmonorail@gmail.com. Until next time, good night.